Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Jessica Devereaux in Baltimore. And welcome to this edition of the Ford Report. Now joining us from Plainfield, New Jersey is Glen Ford. Glen is the co-founder and executive editor of Black Agenda Report and the author of the book, The Big Lie, an analysis of U.S. media coverage of the Grenada invasion. He's also a regular contributor to the Real News. Thanks for joining us, Glen.
Thank you.
So, Glen, we have a lot of Ferguson updates to get to. Officer Darren Wilson, the officer who was responsible for shooting unarmed teenager Michael Brown, he actually resigned from the police force. And also, there's a protest happening today, December 1st. You have a lot of people gathering before the Department of Justice. They're calling for federal investigators to charge Darren Wilson with murder. So, Glen, for you, do you think that's really the answer? Should the federal government be the one to respond to this?
No, I don't think that's the final answer, but I don't mind people raising those questions. All kinds of questions have to be raised, and power must be challenged to figure out a way to fix its lips to give some kind of answer and therefore reveal itself once again as a damn liar. So, yes, it is correct to challenge the Justice Department. There are lots of correct things to do. And I think we're having this conversation because there has been a real step forward in the almost 4 months since Michael Brown was killed. There is now at least the beginnings of a movement, and maybe a kind of leap forward in creating a movement against the criminal justice system of the United States. That's where the Justice Department comes in, but that's not the totality of it. It's against what we at Black Agenda Report call a mass Black incarceration state. And I think that's what this movement that goes under the name of Ferguson really represents. It's a movement against a system in which there is no justice, there is only entrapment. That is the nature of the criminal justice system in the United States. And that's why you see relentless militarization. That's why you see Black men treated as enemy combatants who can be judicially executed, as so many are every week. And that's why 1 out of every 8 prison inmates on planet Earth is an African American, because of this system. And that's why the fight against this mass Black incarceration state, and Michelle Alexander calls it the new Jim Crow. I think there are modern fascist aspects to this mass Black incarceration state, and therefore it requires a more modern vocabulary than the new Jim Crow. But that will do. We have to, in an organized way, challenge the legitimacy of that whole structure, which has been in place since around 1970, when the prison numbers started going up astronomically. This is a different kind of struggle. It's different than voting rights. It's different than movement centered around employment issues, because you are going up against the institutions of the state. You're challenging the state's legitimacy, and you need to mobilize the people who are directly being preyed upon by the cops. You can't maintain that kind of movement, however, while you act as if you respect the authority of the cops. And so last week in Black Agenda Report, I wrote that any movement that defies the police power and rejects the authority of the state will inevitably be deemed illegal in its totality, and it will inevitably be accompanied by some level of violence. There are people out there embedded in our community, and many of them pretending to be part of the movement. And I'm speaking of Al Sharpton, but also legions of preachers and politicians in the communities who really don't want to go up against this state. They want inclusion in this state. They were never really committed to tearing down the mass black incarceration state as an institution, but only getting more black police and getting more black prosecutors, and the ultimate, getting a black attorney general who will do to you just what those white attorney generals and prosecutors did to you. And they are now, especially after the events last Monday in Ferguson, attempting to isolate the young people who are preyed upon directly by the police, who are the cadre of folk who have to be mobilized if this is going to be a movement. And they're saying, well, we got to separate ourselves from them, that they actually harm the movement. And so they're drawing lines. And I think it's incumbent upon honest elements within the movement to draw lines as well, and not fall for that pseudo moralizing about violence always hurting the perpetrator. There's going to be violence. The police are going to instigate and provoke the violence. They are the violent arm of the state, and the response to it is sometimes going to be violent. And we should not allow these Sharpton types to demobilize a movement against police oppression by putting a stigma on our young people.
So Glenn, when, let's say that objective of sort of tearing down this mass incarceration state is reached, then what do you build? Where do you go from there?
Well, many of us believe that the state is violent and repressive and without law, that it is lawless, because it is there not for the purpose of justice, but to protect the interests of what people now call the 1%. The folks who actually run this place, and that would be finance capital. So, yeah, you don't get justice, and there should be no peace while finance capital is in charge, but they are protected by the police, and you have to go through the police to get to them. And that will involve some violence.
All right, Glen Ford, some powerful words coming from you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.